Now, last Friday, a court here in Paris sentenced 3 high-ranking Syrian officials in absentia to life in prison for complicity in war crimes. It's a landmark case and a landmark verdict, the first time that France has held a trial on abuses committed during the Syrian civil war. With details of the case, here's our report.
A landmark case with the harshest penalty handed down. Ali Mamlouk, former head of Syria's Bureau of National Security, Jamil Hassan, a former director of Air Force Intelligence, and Abdel Salam Mahmoud, former director of Syria's Intelligence Investigation Branch, were each handed life sentences for complicity in war crimes. And while they were all tried in absentia, lawyers argue the case sets a precedent.
This verdict is much more than symbolic. This verdict also recognizes that the Syrian regime did indeed commit crimes against humanity, against citizens who are in no way terrorists.
The 3 Syrian officials were charged with the disappearance and death of 2 Franco-Syrians, Mazen Dabbagh, an employee of the French International School in Damascus, and his son Patrick, a 20-year-old student, were both arrested in November 2013. The family say the 2 men were taken to Mézès airport, known as one of the regime's torture centers.
Fate has chosen them as torchbearers, a flag bearer for all the Syrians who were not so lucky to be able to go before a court and to have their executioner sentenced. So for them, posthumously, this is a victory, of course.
Last week's trial in France was the first involving senior Syrian officials in a European court. Human rights groups are hoping the outcome refocuses attention on crimes committed during Syria's civil war, with the country's president still in power and eager to shed his status as global pariah.
Well, I'm very pleased to be joined on the programme now by Clémence Bectarte. She's one of the lawyers for the Dabbagh family. Indeed, we heard from her in that report you just watched. Welcome to you. Thanks for finding the time to speak to us today.
Thank you.
First of all, I imagine it was a big moment on Friday when that guilty verdict and the sentencing came through in the court. Tell us a bit about your reaction then.
Yeah, it was a huge moment of emotion because, we had worked for so many years for this trial to happen. And we were, first of all, even before the verdict was pronounced, very satisfied of the way these 4 days of hearings took place. This was one of the rare opportunity for expert witnesses, survivors of the Syrian detention centers, activists, and of course the Dabbagh family to publicly recall the stories and the horror that so many thousands of victims, of Syrian victims, have suffered in the Syrian detention centers. So the hearing was really very powerful, full of humanity also. And I must say that it was also, I am very admirative of the courage of these Syrian victims, witnesses, survivors, family members, who despite strong security concerns, because of course the Syrian regime is still in place, accepted to testify publicly. And then this verdict, so hoped for, was really a great victory for not only for the Dabbagh family, as Obeida, my client, has said it from the beginning. He sought this battle in court not only for his brother and nephew, but also for all those Syrian victims who could not file such complaints and get the opening of such trials. And, the verdict was pronounced life imprisonment against top Syrian officials. There had never been such top officials prosecuted ever since the beginning of the revolution and then civil war in 2011. So this is a very positive sign of hope for victims and also a strong signal to the regime and to states who would consider normalizing relations with the regime.
And as you say, family members, your clients were not just in court, they testified during the trial. I don't know, I assume you were able to speak to them afterwards. Give us a sense of how they felt when that verdict came through.
They were, I think, and I hope, very proud of themselves, because it was, very challenging, even for this family, who is a Franco-Syrian family who has lived in France for 25 years. But even for them, it was, of course, very scary to have this trial publicly, with the media coverage, etc. So there was a lot of security concerns for them, for all of those who testified. And they managed to, with a great courage and determination, to testify, to tell the story, not only about what happened to their brother and nephew, but also because during the whole course of the investigation, they really managed to get evidence. They were the ones getting the death certificates that were provided by the regime in 2018, and that gave us the absolute evidence that Patrick and Mazen Dabbagh, the two victims in this case, had died in the Midze detention center. So, of course, it is a very huge victory for them.
Well, I was going to ask you about evidence. I assume it was a challenge to collect evidence from Syria, given the fact that the very regime we're talking about is still in power in Damascus.
Yes, but it's not the first. It was the first trial in France, but it's not the first worldwide. There was this historic conviction that happened in Koblenz in Germany in 2021. That was the first conviction for crimes against humanity, and trials that have taken place since then, including this one in France, have shown that despite the inability for any prosecutor, investigator that are leading these investigations to access the Syrian territory and to collect themselves evidence, it has been, possible to gather, to collect this evidence. And this is really because of the strength, the power, and the courage and determination of the Syrian civil society. Back in 2011, a lot of experts were saying that the Syrian conflict was one of the most documented ever. And this is because there were, all through the way, courageous Syrian human rights defenders, activists, NGOs, lawyers who continue to document, to build the trust of the victims, also of the survivors, of the witnesses, so that they could share their stories in court. And so this verdict also proves, as previous verdicts, that it is possible to gather this kind of evidence and to lead to that kind of convictions.
Just a final question for you. In November last year, France issued an arrest warrant for the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad himself. Now, that was for chemical weapons use against civilians during the civil war. Would you say, as a French lawyer, that this country is leading the way, then, in trying to prosecute Syrian government officials?
Well, let's say that for years, Germany has led the way, and we know it with, 4 trials that took place in Germany. Now France, indeed, and including with this historic and unprecedented arrest warrant that was issued by investigative judges in an investigation concerning the use of chemical weapons and 2 chemical attacks that took place in 2013. This was a very strong and courageous decision. I am the lawyer of 7 Syrian victims in this case of the chemical attacks. And I can tell you that this was also a huge victory for them, a huge sign of hope that prosecution could go including to the highest level of the state and to Bashar al-Assad. Now this arrest warrant has been challenged by the French public prosecutor. We had a hearing a couple of weeks ago before the Court of Appeal of Paris, and we'll know on 26th of June if this arrest warrant is confirmed or not. So let's hope, yes, that these investigations will continue, that they will continue to target the highest level of the Syrian state, because the strongest fear now for Syrian victims is that the international community forgets the reality of the crimes against humanity that have been perpetrated by this regime and that continue to be perpetrated by the Assad regime in Syria against the Syrian population.
Clémence Bectarte, it's so good to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.